With very little to go off of, I've devised a list of 10 bosses I not only desperately want in Elden Ring Nightreign, but 10 that I think could plausibly be added in the upcoming DLC. I will be honest, this list is based mostly off vibes, with some other things like gameplay mechanics and FromSoft and the community's general fondness being kept under consideration. So without further ado, from Dark Souls 2, not only my favorite boss, but the one I still consider the hardest in the entire game, Fume Knight. A DLC boss in his own right, Fume Knight is a standard in a game known for bosses with limited move pools and slow animations, both of which Nightreign can amend. One of several reasons he has become so beloved is the many different ways in which he can punish you. Though Nameless King is often credited as the first Souls boss to really utilize delayed attacks, Fume had his own version of this as well, with his long sweeping slashes and overhead slams. And he mixes in more than his fair share of quick sudden attacks too. He has a passive blocking mode where timing, and more importantly spacing, is crucial. With all the Souls and Souls-likes I've played since my first ever with Dark Souls 2, I still don't think anyone has made as good of a boss as Fume Knight when it comes to being aware of your distancing. Knowing what options he has and what he likes to do at close range, far range, mid range, when you can and can't sneak in damage, when you should let him make the first move, and when it's safe to retreat and heal. All of these are aspects that mechanically make him so incredible to dance with, and that's not to mention his insane design and stunning visuals. With a little more modern polish both on his end and what we're able to do interacting with him offensively and defensively, I think Fume can step out of his well-deserved mantle of S-tier Dark Souls 2 boss and become a more frequent consideration when discussing the greatest bosses FromSoft has ever crafted. For me, he's always ranked absurdly high. Off to Dark Souls 1 now, and I think a no-brainer in terms of a boss fans want the most is Artorias, and there's even a few ways they could go about doing this. So far, Nightreign has just copy-pasted old Souls bosses, which is totally fine and suits Artorias very well. But could you imagine if he got the Radahn treatment and we got to face him at his prime? Uncorrupted by the Abyss, not yet relying on his offhand to wield his iconic greatsword? There's been no lore reason given for why these old Dark Souls bosses are in the land of Limveld, so who's to say we have to face the exact version of the boss we fought back as the Chosen Undead, Bearer of the Curse, or Ashen One? The moveset could remain similar, but taking advantage of his dominant hand could allow for more heavy two-handed attacks, perhaps even use of his Great Shield as well. A phaser portion of this fight could look a bit like Dragon Slayer armor even. The possibilities are limitless. This is among the most beloved bosses in all of Souls for a reason, and if they plop Knight Artorias into Nightreign, people would go insane. If they plopped in Artorias the Abyss Walker, pre-corruption, in his prime, we would all collectively rejoice. And perhaps pee our pants. Sticking with Dark Souls 1, a boss that feels built for Nightreign in particular, for me, is Sanctuary Guardian. Overshadowed by the behemoths that occupy the same DLC, I've always thought Sanctuary Guardian was super underrated and one of the best bosses of that game. In Dark Souls 1, he represented a pretty significant shift in tone, becoming far faster and more aggressive than anything else you'll find in the base game. With a limited move pool and lots of maneuverability, he just feels like the perfect field boss. Aspects of him, like with many old Souls bosses, have been reused and reinterpreted with other enemies in Elden Ring, but bringing back the original DLC Gatekeeper would be lovely, and I think he would just fit in seamlessly. Back to Dark Souls 2. Don't worry, Dark Souls 3, you'll get your chance. I think this guy was pretty high up on most people's lists of most expected returning bosses. Know how Morgott's become a certified hater, following the Tarnished around, jumping him and fucking with him? The aptly named Pursuer did it first, appearing as a proper boss in the game's first real area before emerging from the ground many more times throughout your playthrough in Drang Lake. He can even jump you before that proper boss fight, and in one of the game's most important areas, you can fight two of them at the same time. Call me when Morgott manages that shit. The moveset is primitive, but I think that can be supplemented by adding a few more modern status ailments perhaps. Although I haven't really mentioned it for every boss on this list, I do think some would need slight tweaks just to make them work better, and upping the Pursuer's actual danger would certainly be chief among them. He is tough as shit for new players, I can attest to that, and he is extremely challenging in the areas he appears in, mostly because of the cramped spaces and gank enemies, so maybe there's something there. However, I would hate for a boss I love so much to be watered down by always spawning in with minor enemies as well. Keep his moveset a bit basic, but make the punishment for mistakes severe, and this boss will be just as imposing as he appears. Also, keep his eagle. There's no reason why he can't always spawn in by getting dropped from the eagle or emerging from the ground. It's one or the other FromSoft. Considering Shadow of the Erdtree took clear inspiration from him, why not bring Pontiff Sullivan properly into the fold? Bosses with unlimited stamina and endless combo extenders with seemingly no openings has become the standard for FromSoft boss design, and I think the first time they dabbled with that philosophy was clearly with the Pontiff. This is a boss not unlike Nameless King, who acted as a pretty severe wall for Dark Souls 3 players. I see no reason why we shouldn't bring in yet another layer of trauma to this punishing fucking game. His speed and tenacity, as well as his inscrutability, would make him a wonderful addition to Nightreign. Where Sanctuary Guardian and even the Pursuer gave me very obvious Elden Ring field boss vibes, Pontiff gives Remembrance boss vibes, and R'hllana truly was designed after him so much that he may as well already be one. His run back was goddamn hell in Dark Souls 3, so he may as well up it a few notches by making us survive a whole night cycle or two before being able to get stomped by him. The way his Phase 2 clone operates is something this series hasn't really played around with much before or since. It can be pretty tricky to maneuver around while still finding openings for damage, and I think that's what Elden Ring is all about. Bonus points for the fact that this boss functions well against multiple multiple people, with his frantic swirling two-sworded slashes and clearly that clone phase. This is a pretty odd insight, but the more I thought about it, the more I think FromSoft chose these certain bosses to bring back into Nightreign as a representation of exactly what they'd be willing to do, or what we can and can't expect going forward. People theorized on who may and may not appear, but despite only featuring 6, they crossed off a lot of different boxes in terms of the type of bosses they featured. Basically, I think there are far fewer bosses than you might expect that couldn't be worked into Nightreign. For example, Centipede Demon is fought in a god-awful tight arena with lava all around. On paper, he seems like a boss who shouldn't be anywhere near this game. He's borderline a gimmick boss, and yet, here he is. They just reformatted him to fit into a cleaner, more generic landscape, and it's worked great. With Smelter Demon, they combined 2 bosses into one, since his transition in Nightreign is him going from the red to the blue Smelter Demon. Freya is a main boss, sort of the equivalent of a Remembrance boss. Nameless King is an optional boss in a hard-to-reach area, and also features 2 distinctly different phases. Dancer and Gaping Dragon seem like the most bog standard of the bunch, but even Gaping Dragon had those mages firing sorceries at you throughout the fight, and Dancer was unique in that you could fight her at such a wide range of levels. I feel like you could name most Dark Souls bosses and make an argument for why they could conceivably work in Nightreign based off of the 6 they've already added. Story bosses, optional bosses, bosses where their arena is a massive aspect of their fight, bosses where there are 2 variations rolled into one. One of the only styles we didn't see included was any form of duo or trio boss, but God knows Elden Ring fucking loves that shit, so of course something like ONS could work. Speaking of, give me Ornstein and Smough in Nightreign. I'm not the largest proponent of this fight, but having said that, the premise of this pair is amongst their best in this series, and they've failed at it time and time since. I'm looking at you, Godskin duo. One slow and punishing, and one fast with range is perfect. This is an incredibly iconic fight, would unite the entire fanbase, and Phase 2 would work excellently against multiple opponents as well with the huge AoEs and all that. As iconic as they are, they don't encroach upon the one territory that this game has thus far strayed away from, that being final bosses of any kind. They're Knights of Gwyn, yes, well one of them is, but Nameless is Gwyn's fucking son, so if he can be in it, I think they can too. Artorias does come close to violating my thought process here. Yeah, he's not a final boss, but he's a hell of a lot more important than anyone else we've discussed. So he is pushing it, but if they want to just use the rule of cool, then he's gotta be considered. I guess Fume Knight's the final boss of his DLC, shit. Well, DS2 is weird with having 3 separate DLCs anyway, so I think he could get a pass. I don't think Fume Knight is thought of much as a final boss the same way as, well, basically any of the real final bosses, base game or DLC. I still think Nightreign will stay away from the Gwyns and Slave Knight Gales and so on, but I think everyone else is more or less fair game. Back to everyone's favorite Dark Souls 2, and I think Dark Lurker could be a really cool addition. Even for a world as chaotic as Elden Ring, I think he would feel very out of place and mysterious, and that's a good thing considering he feels the exact same way in his home game of Dark Souls 2. Dark Lurker is well regarded as one of the best bosses in Dark Souls 2, but thanks to a very demanding rigmarole of shit you need to do to actually fight him, which not only includes fighting 3 dickhead NPCs in an evil arena with sudden drop-offs and awkward movement, but also requires a fucking resource for each attempt, an uncommon one you'd have to farm for if you die too many times. His questline is pretty fucking awkward and specific, and I'd categorize him in the group of bosses the vast majority of the player base would never encounter without a guide. So let's bring him to Nightreign. He has a duplication attack which would feel right at home in Elden Ring, and I think this game slightly lacks the more ethereal, sorcery-based bosses from Dark Souls. With how beautiful yet creepy this boss is, I think there's a lot of ways to go with handling him? I don't believe it's ever been confirmed. Most sites refer to Dark Lurker as it, but I've always thought of him as a very feminine male. But see, look at that! Mystery. Give my pal some justice and let the whole community experience this unsettling but excellent fight. Dragon Slayer Armor is a boss I have less to really delve into, but god he's cool and I'd love to fight him in Nightreign. The boss is technically a pilgrim butterfly controlling a hollow suit of armor, and the butterfly joins in for phase 2, and you can also see it die as you finish off its puppet. All around, this is just cool as hell, and they could use the butterfly in really unique ways to suit this fight even better for both multiplayer and Nightrein's faster movement system. If they wanted to go really wild, maybe they could do Dragon Slayer Armor as that first mini-boss you fight before the actual night boss, and the butterfly could be the night boss. This would obviously require creating essentially an entirely new boss, but I wouldn't put it past FromSoft, and I know they could make it cool as fuck. In either case, just bring the turtle shell shield-wielding reanimated hunk of metal where he belongs. And lastly, you didn't think we were gonna have Artorias without his loyal companion Sif, did you? Frankly, if I had full control over this DLC, I'd make them a duo fight. Can you imagine? You start beating Prime Artorias and his fearless wolf comes to his aid? Or the opposite, you get Sif into his heartbreaking limping phase and Artorias jumps you, buffing himself with rage while reinvigorating the Great Grey Wolf. There is not a Souls fan alive who would not weep if this happened, and for people who haven't played Dark Souls 1 yet, this would be a great way to interest people, and with no context, this would still be raw as hell. They've recreated Sif several times already, and none have come even close to living up to our beloved dog. And that's my list. In speaking with other friends of mine in the Souls community, there are tons of other bosses people either really want to see or genuinely think will be included. So please feel free to drop as detailed a comment as you'd like about a boss you really want to see, whether I featured it or not. I can even... Oh, that was only 9? Okay, wow, one more. Demon of Hatred. Why should Dark Souls have all the fun? In fact, give me Martyr Ligorius too. Subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. Thanks for sticking around. Until next time.